Hello again, and welcome to another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Eileen Rochford, CEO of the marketing and strategy firm, the Harbinger Group.
And I'm Rob Johnson, president of Rob Johnson Communications. So today we have an interesting episode lined up. We're going to talk about the role of strategic partnerships and effective marketing plans. But with a twist here, we'll be exploring what happens when a partner gets embroiled in a scandal.
Ooh, juicy stuff. I love a good scandal. So we all know that strategic partnerships can be vital in successful marketing work. They can help brands reach a wider audience. They can enhance credibility and strengthen customer loyalty. Maybe even boost revenue if all goes well, right? But it's crucial to choose every single partner very carefully, considering your own brand's values and reputation and doing the required due diligence. So there are lots of different kinds of strategic marketing partnerships. We're just going to talk about a few of them today, but let me list some of those so we're all on the same page. Marketing partnerships such as sponsorships, and that's of things like professional organizations, events, or sports venues and teams. It's probably some of the more well-known, right? Sometimes even specific athletes are endorsed by mega brands, right? Those are more common. Well, there's also things like licensing agreements, letting another company take your brand and license it through their own product, for example. There are things like distribution agreements. That's where, it'll be known that two companies are working together. And so, their reputation or your reputation are intertwined. Things like co-branding, think like Nike's Apple Watch or the Apple Plus watch, right? That's an awesome example of co-branding. Or this is one I love. Recently, I walked into a Vans store and saw the Haribo bear was all over shoes, and clothes and socks and things like that. That's an awesome example of co-branding. There's also, joint ventures, as well as nonprofit partnerships. So if an example of nonprofit partnership, in case you're wondering, that one's a little more complex, but Teach for America does a great job of this. They work with companies like Adobe and Whirlpool in their Creativity for All campaign. So again, Adobe and Whirlpool's reputations become intertwined with Teach for America's in those examples. So all of these partnerships obviously have the potential to boost or burn your reputation.
Well, and when you're starting with it too, you're trying to boost that reputation. So imagine, I'll take the Teach for America example you just gave. That's a good not-for-profit brand, right? And all of a sudden they get to work with Adobe and Whirlpool. And Whirlpool's thinking, and Adobe probably, hey, we get to associate with a really great not-for-profit brand like Teach for America. So it's mutually beneficial as long as there's no crisis coming down the pike.
Right. And there's a lot of different scenarios where crises can emerge in any of those types of strategic marketing partnerships, right?
Yeah.
There's things like let's just sit on sports for a sec. So the example of a team, you're sponsoring a team. Well, there can be doping scandals like the FIFA scandal. What was it? 2018. I mean, it wasn't that long ago, right? It was enormous. So that's an awesome example. There's doping. There's also, of course, now with specific athletes, sexual assault issues that are being reported regularly. So sad to hear that, but regularly.
And also, well, think about this too, though. So the flip side of that is you get accused of something, and is it too hot for you? Do you need to just,
Yeah.
The thing is, this isn't a court of law. This is an arrangement.
No, right.
And so if somebody's bringing too much heat to your brand,
what do you do? Well, we're going to get to that. So we're
going to get to that. But these are all things to consider. And I'm really glad that you sort of outlined the different marketing agreements that are out there. We're not talking about, we're not going to get to every single thing, but that's a pretty good idea of what people need to be thinking about when they're defining this.
Yeah. And aside from sports, remember that you reinforce the nonprofit example with Teach for America. Well, in any nonprofit situation or professional association or organization example, you can encounter allegations of unethical management, financial mismanagement on a very large scale. These things can come to light. You just never know. Every relationship has its risks and rewards.
It sure does. So let's set the scene here a little bit more. So it's been revealed that your carefully selected strategic partner has been accused of serious wrongdoing, and it's making major headlines, all the kinds of wrong headlines that you don't want. Maybe they've been accused of unethical behavior, their leadership is in turmoil, or their work for another client has gone viral for all the wrong reasons. There's so many scenarios out there. But I want to talk about something, just kind of set the table here, but we're not going to get into it because you and I don't have, we're not dealing with this case other than we've been watching it, which is Northwestern University. So everybody knows it's one of the finest institutes of higher learning you will find anywhere. And it's been going through a difficult time with the athletic department. Started with football, the hazing scandal, and headlines seem to be released by the day. Now it's perhaps other sports, whatever the case is. So in this instance and any other instances, and again, we want to stress that Eileen and I are not actively involved in the Northwestern thing. We just wanted to, kind of hook it, this whole idea, with something like that so people could understand, okay, that's a current event that we're pretty familiar with. First and foremost, you need to assess the situation and the impact it may have on your company's brand and your own as a leader of that brand. And you really need to communicate openly and honestly with the audience, stakeholders, customers. And if you need to, you may want to distance yourself from the scandal and express your commitment to your own values. That's a tough one sometimes, because especially when the headlines keep rolling out and rolling out and rolling out, and you're like, okay, we're going to stick with them. And then you find out more and more and more. And again, I said it a little earlier, it may get a little too hot for you there.
Mm-hmm. And honestly, that example that you gave of what's been happening and coming to light, I suppose, more so recently at Northwestern University, a similar situation could happen anywhere. It could happen in a workplace, not in a sports locker room. There's all types of allegations of that are possible. So I think what we're discussing here today is, what do you do when that happens and you're involved in a strategic partnership, which kind of leads us into what you were, where you're trying to take us before. I think the big question in a case like this, or any example that we could throw out there, is really, what is the right choice for your own brand's reputation? Should you maintain the strategic partnership, or should you abandon it? And how do you evaluate what is, the right thing to do? I think where you started to go a little earlier, Rob, was the idea that this isn't a court of law, and some things can be truly just in the form, or in the beginning stages, in the form of an allegation. They haven't been investigated, but they're making huge reputation damaging headlines, and there's blowback involved in that for any organization, associated with, the company or brand at the epicenter of the scandal. So what is the right thing to do? Is it to walk away? What would you do?
Right. We're not, and the thing about this podcast is we're not telling you what to do as a company, because it's certainly on a case by case basis. And it's also based upon the relationship you've had with this strategic partner over the years. And again, the reason we brought up a Northwestern is because, again, one of the finest schools you'll find, an athletic department that has higher standards than most other athletic departments, which means they have not a difficult time competing, but they're competing with other schools who don't have as high a standards as they do. And so,
you mean academic standards, for clarity?
Academic, yeah. So to get to play for them, sometimes you have to have, a Stanford or a Northwestern. There's not many schools that have, Harvard, that have really high academic standards, and even if you're an elite athlete, you may not just get in because you're an elite athlete. That's what I'm talking about, those high standards that they have. And so when you're hearing these stories come out about all of these just terrible headlines, it can be jarring. And so we don't have any I don't have any knowledge. I don't know if you do, Eileen, of any sponsors that have, reacted in certain ways to what's been going on at Northwestern. But it's such an important case study because it's had an impeccable brand forever, right?
I think, though, let's look at it from the perspective of if it insert any organization's name, any university's name, what would be the right thing to do if your brand was intertwined with that organization's name on a large scale, right? In my professional opinion, the best choice, especially if the allegations are quite serious and widespread, and it is becoming rather clear that it's highly unlikely that because it's so widespread that it's false, that this isn't something that
right
was made up, right? Then you need to take action, and that does include distancing your brand, even if it means just obviously you can't. If you haven't had protection clauses in your contract, then you're going to lose out on your sponsorship money. That's okay. It's a small price to pay. Remove your signage, remove your association, from your own website, but also say why you're doing that. Don't just take it down. That is my professional opinion. If I were asked, I would guide an organization to, it's probably a good idea to let this play out and certainly make it clear that you are not in agreement with anything that has gone on within this organization. And you're eager to see what the institution will do to rectify the situation. But for now, it's best that you not endorse what's going on or transpired, and thus you're pausing in a visible way on your relationship. That would be my advice.
That's very solid advice. I think you've done this before. So yes, but it's very important because you don't get a second chance to do this right. True. So you get one chance to get it right. And it's not a plug and play. This isn't like, Rob and Eileen came up with one way to do it. It just depends on so many different factors and how that relationship is and how long-standing it is and what kind of trust has been there and what you can count on with them. There's just so many things to think about. And there's no easy answer. That's the other thing that's really important to convey as well.
Sometimes, though, if it is abundantly clear that serious wrongdoing has gone down,
right? In
my opinion, I think that an organization not only should distance themselves, but should also potentially consider a statement, even saying very, why we are so vehemently against everything that transpired here, right? Depending on the severity of the situation. Now, that I don't know that the Northwestern situation warrants that kind of relation or response. Maybe it does to some organizations. Maybe because their values are, completely in opposition to what is being reported in the news media. Maybe it is necessary for that organization. I don't know, but it certainly should be strongly considered.
Yeah, fair enough.
And I think every business leader, it's not just about the brand, it's also about the leaders of those organizations. Your own reputation as a business, organizational, philanthropic leader is intertwined with your own organizations. We all know that.
And your values are on display. Your values absolutely. As a leader are on display.
Yeah. So it's really important to think about, is there a role we should play here in helping, to at least make it clear, that behavior of X nature is not something that we will support here under any circumstances. We don't allow it in our own company. We wouldn't allow it or endorse it in an organization that we sponsor. Those kinds of strong words might need to be considered by the leader as well as the brand itself. That's my advice. Yeah, there you go, for free.
No, for free. For free. There you go.
Yeah. Well, there's one other thing we should mention here, and that is, we saw this in a few places, but I'll attribute it to a company called RTR Sports Marketing. They had a great piece about avoiding and preparing for strategic partnerships in the sports realm. But their advice, again, and I think you and I need to state this, is you're not just signing a contract and then running off and creating, the merch you're going to co-brand or, your marketing plan to launch your joint venture or the signage that you're going to put up in the stadium. You have to first, before you even sign it, make sure that you've got things within your contract protections, right? That's critical. But also work through that plan of what if this happened? 3, 4, 5, 6, however many number of scenarios that you can game out that might happen. What would your response be, even in a loose way? And if you would stay with the sponsorship or if you would leave the sponsorship, and what would the messaging be? You've got to have, just like you would in any, every organization, is, we have said on multiple podcasts before, if you don't have a crisis response preparedness plan and team in place, you're not ready. So even when you're signing deals like this, strategic marketing partnerships, build in that element of a strategic plan when you sign so that, even if it went down the next day, you'd be ready for it.
And we've said this again and again as well as it relates to that, Eileen. When people say, oh, I'll just hire you when the crisis happens. And the answer is always like, you're never, ever going to catch up. So that's worth repeating, because you're always going to be playing catch up, and there's always going to be a narrative different than the one that you want to convey that's going to be out there, and you're just going to be playing catch up the entire time. And your chance for, I don't want to say a positive outcome, but a reasonable outcome is diminished when you don't plan in advance.
Absolutely. Am I going to say it again? My favorite quote.
Say it.
The time to fix the roof is when the sun is shining, right? Yeah. Now, some would say John F. Kennedy said that. Some say Robert F. Kennedy. I don't remember. I'm sorry. I'll put it in the show notes, but brilliant. And I love it so much. I say it all the time.
And it's, and while you may have this enthusiasm about this partnership that you've just started, you need to also, as you said, game for those scenarios. It's sort of like looking around the corner. What's out there? What could be out there? It's not that you're being negative or you're being unnecessarily concerned. It means that you're doing your due diligence. And because you're not going to, if it happens in real time, you're not going to get a day or 3 to figure out what you're going to say. It's going to be almost instantaneous.
Totally. I mean, who wouldn't get caught up in the prospect of, oh, awesome, our company is going to be aligned with the coolest team or the coolest new tech company, or insert, whatever you want.
Yeah. But what happens when they step in it, right?
I know.
We know the bottom line here, Eileen, is that any contract you sign has got to contain clauses to protect the company. I don't think that's anything that's earth-shattering here. So not only with marketing rights, brand exposure, athlete appearances, and days with the customers, but different penalties on different levels. So it can cover potential damages that the association with a badly behaved sport property, athlete, whatever the case may be, can cause. And it's essential to review the partnership agreement, considering exit strategies and any potential clauses related to reputational damage or crisis situations. And let's not forget the power of proactive communication. Didn't we just mention that a second ago?
We did. Getting ahead of it. A second ago. 100%.
Yeah.
Always get ahead of it. Yep. Don't wait. And that's why you have to have a plan ahead of time for, these possible scenarios, many of which you just listed. You can't be speedy if you don't already have your plan. 100%.
Yeah. And we can't, we don't want to sit there and say, hey, the ink's still wet on the contract. It's so great. And here we are looking at potential out clauses, but you got to do it. And if you don't, and you don't have an answer, when this story takes on a life of its own, you better be just as nimble as everybody else that's telling that story.
Yeah. And I actually review quite a few of these. I'm not an attorney, but I do have kind of visibility into a number of different types of strategic partnership contracts. And you'd be surprised how many of them don't have a payout penalty clause that basically is the value of the sponsorship that you paid in as the sponsor can be refunded should certain scandal, criteria be met. And that's a really interesting thing to think about. How well equipped is a lawyer to build out those different scenarios into that clause? I think they can give some good general legal language, but having your attorney consult with your marketing communications expert, whoever that may be, internal or external, to give that clause more color would be a really smart thing to do, because that can improve the robustness, the enforceability of that penalty clause.
And really, it's sloppy if you don't include it, because you have to realize that no matter what side of this partnership you're on, that is boilerplate language. That has got to be baked in, has got to be built in, because you have to have cover. You have to have assurances that, yes, we're going to be spending a lot of money with this partner, but if things go sideways and it's not through any fault of our own as the company, we need to be made whole, for lack of a better term.
Yeah. And you won't ever be made whole fully if your own reputation is dragged through it, along with the scandal-filled organization. But you can at least get the hard cash back that you invested at a minimum. But I will say this, Rob, it is not boilerplate language, particularly if the sponsee, if that organization originates the contract. Believe it or not, of course, it's in their best interest not to always put that in. Or they'll say, X percent of the contract. Say the season is canceled for some reason, something like that. Or the event is canceled, those kinds of things. You'll get a percentage back. But that's where, your attorney goes to bat for you to say, no, actually, because the event never happened.
They want
get
wiggle
all
room,
our money.
Right? They want as much wiggle room as they can get. And that's natural. They would feel that way. And while it isn't boilerplate language, the thing I was saying was like, it should be. It should be. Nobody should be surprised when that language is included in that particular contract, even though, to your point, many times it's not.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's move on to another area of protection that isn't necessarily in a contract form, but it is something that is really within your own control. And we alluded to this earlier. It's crucial to remember that when you enter into a partnership like any of those that we've described, you're not just sharing your resources, you're also sharing reputations. They're intertwined for that, length of time that you have this relationship, and potentially beyond, because people may remember, this association, strongly or otherwise. So because of that, due diligence is key. So like we said a little bit earlier, make sure your partners aligns with your own company's values, and that their reputation and your reputation can weather a storm, should it come. And for our listeners, I want to say this too. When you're faced with a crisis involving a partner, it is vital to move really, really fast. You've got to not only do your due diligence in advance, everybody knows that, and there's a lot you can do there. I'll just sit on that for 1 second. Your due diligence, you can go really deep into that. You can use all kinds of methods of inquiry to find out not only before a contract starts, if the people involved, the organizations involved, their reputations are strong and healthy, and they are who they say they are. They act the way that they represent themselves to be, those kinds of things. There's all kinds of methods of inquiry. We'll put some examples in the show notes, but I want you to know you should lean on all of them. And research is your first step, but also going a bit deeper, looking into their financial records, looking into everything visible online about reviews, Better Business Bureau complaints, all kinds of things are available to you, and you should make great use of them before you decide, are we going to go in with this relationship? Are they the company we should be keeping, right? In terms of how we conduct our business and how we want to be known in the marketplace. So once a crisis hits, though, it's that speed that we've talked about. I think this is, again, I don't care if it's on self-serving, but if you don't have outside resources that can flex and have the capacity to take the inbound inquiries to send out the messaging that you need to be sent out. If your internal staff is super duper lean historically, you should have some kind of a relationship with a reputable PR or marketing firm that you can lean on, even if it's a small retainer that's kind of in the event of an emergency retainer, that's fine. But you should always have that extra support available to you, and don't expect to be able to hire someone on a dime, especially in these lean times right now. It's getting harder and harder for agencies to take on clients in a pinch. It really is. I'm seeing it all over the place.
Well, and the reason is, I think you and I would agree with this. We have people that are paying for our expertise on a regular basis. And then somebody pops in and says, oh, the sky's falling, help me now. And you're like, well, I can't ignore all of these people that have been, I've been on this journey with.
Right. Of course not.
But the bottom line that you were talking about a second ago is that if you don't do the drill, if you don't have these firms drilling you on what to do, who answers to what, what is the game plan when this goes down, and everybody instinctively knows about it. And then I just mentioned it a second ago, and then you drill on it to make sure that everybody knows exactly what needs to happen in that crisis situation. So you do get ahead of it, so you don't get behind it. And so you have a chance for whatever success might look like in that scenario.
And one more reason why external partners, I think, are a great choice is it's very difficult when a crisis hits and your own company's reputation and people are wrapped up in something. It's really hard to separate yourselves emotionally and to think clearly, rationally, be able to organize yourselves. Having an outside entity come in and assess the situation objectively can be all the difference to how things turn out for you. I just had a recent situation where a potential organization reached out to us, and we're having kind of the first assessment conversation on their crisis. And they were dead set on what they needed. They outlined it. Here's what we need you to do. It's going to look like this. We want you to do X, Y, and Z. And our entire team listened to them and responded with, that's lovely. And, all those things will be important to you eventually, but they're meaningless until you do these first two things that are essential. And they hadn't even thought of them. So that's just one example of how someone from the outside really can not just be kind of calmer by comparison potentially, but really just think a bit more rationally and clearly and see things that you and your team probably won't.
No, that's so true, because that extra set of eyes from outside or multiple eyes really can help you. And then not only that, they can maybe speak truth to you in ways people internally that are on the payroll can't or won't do.
Yeah. Candor. Another one of my favorite words.
Candor.
Yeah. We guarantee candor. That's for sure.
What about it? Well, listen, we could go on and on about this. There's so much to unpack here, but I hope that some of these conversations that we've been having here on the podcast today have been helpful to you and kind of gave you this isn't solving all of your problems. It's just sort of bringing some of the attention to some of the finer points that you need to think about.
Yeah. Strategic partnerships are exciting, but they're also rife with potential issues. So we're just trying to help you get prepared. That's all.
Yes, they are.
We'll put more of these resources in the show notes. There were a number of things that we talked about today. I'll also link to a few of our prior shows about crisis preparedness and crisis management, because the best practices and basics are covered in those.
With our friend and expert, Harlan Loeb.
Yep.
He was excellent in those. We love having him. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of Can You Hear Me? I'm Rob Johnson, and we love to hear from you, our listeners. If you have any thoughts on today's topic or any other topic you'd like us to cover in future episodes, please reach out to us on social media.
We're both on LinkedIn. You know where to find us.
Yes, indeed.
All right. I'm Eileen Rochford. We thank you for listening. And remember, you can find Can You Hear Me wherever you get your podcasts: Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and more.